Live text access, training for real-time intralingual subtitlers. Unit 6, Velotype, Element 2, Metalinguistic skills, turning nonverbal elements into verbal. Type punctuation while keeping the pace of the speaker. On completion of this training sequence, you will be able to produce coherent text while typing by extracting and combining the information conveyed with the speaker's material. Identify which nonverbal elements need to be turned into verbal for each LTA training working context by applying techniques like changing colors or font size or inserting labels. And type punctuation while keeping the pace of the speaker. This is the agenda of this presentation. I will first recall the skills of the velotypist to then concentrate on the metalinguistic skills with a focus on the typing of punctuation, which is essential during a typing performance because it improves text functionality in terms of accuracy, readability and legibility of transcripts. I will finally focus on main punctuation characters that you will be requested to practice along the course to develop, reinforce and maintain the skill at hand. The challenging speaker. As you have seen, a velotypist has to do many things at the same time. In Element 2, LO1, we have dealt with metalinguistic skills, meaning all those skills related to being able to improve textual, verbalization and typing skills at the same time, which is another set of skills a velotypist has to possess. In particular, for a velotypist to be able and become a professional in the field, he or she also has to be able to process and guarantee a good functionality of the final product, thus to guarantee accuracy, readability and legibility of the text produced. This all involves firstly and foremost the ability of the velotypist to perform a good analysis, synthesis and reformulation of the speaker's discourse. While you can only develop these competences by the time and thanks to ad hoc exercises, you may be interested in knowing how this metalinguistic skill works. Indeed, this is exactly what we are going to see in the next section. In this element, Element 2, we will deal with the typing of punctuation. Functionality of the text. As we know, and as in any multitasking process, which involves doing different things at the same time, in typing two main types of skills are involved. Understanding, aimed at comprehending the source text, and typing, aimed at making the most out of understanding under stressful conditions and with a reduced processing capacity than usual. Typing punctuation while keeping the pace of the speaker is another important skill in order to render the functionality of the final typed text. Important to such a good performance are the ability to understand the communicative intention of the source message, to understand the red thread of the discourse, the capacity to select and produce the relevant information, and to divide between main and secondary ideas and to deliver an accurate punctuation. More, the capacity to identify the discourse connectors while deducing meaning through context and extra-linguistic elements. Last but not least, the ability to condense information and to segment information in sense units. This is the result of a good mix of accuracy, readability and legibility of the text produced as a final text. In the case of typing, the most common method used to evaluate the quality of subtitles produced in real time consists of assessing accuracy. Needless to say, where quality is concerned, there are also a number of other features to be considered, such as delay, positioning, character identification and speed, as well as factors relating to their reception by readers, i.e. comprehension and perception. Readability is about arranging words and groups of words in a way that allows the reader's eye to access the content easily and in a way that makes sense. It is important to understand what makes one typeface more legible than another. But basically, legibility is the quality deriving from a text which can be read and understood without much effort, also meaning that the message can fully and immediately reach the recipient. And the main rules to follow when typing the text are typing in an orderly manner while still keeping the pace of the speaker, and making sentences which are not too long. Punctuation plays a paramount role in structuring of the text. Type punctuation. We have already highlighted that using punctuation in typing improves the readability and usability of transcripts. As a fact, punctuation used in the right place significantly improves the readability of transcripts and reduces the time it takes to edit them. It is the use of special marks to enable readers to understand a piece of writing. Good punctuation follows the rhythms of speech, telling the reader to pause at the right points and to organize the information in the document that he or she is reading. It reduces misunderstandings and makes the writing clear. But how important is punctuation really? And which are the most commonly used punctuation characters in real-time subtitling? We are now going to dive into its importance in transcription, describing how we intend and how we use punctuation. First of all, it is important to highlight that punctuation marks fall under the domains of both verbal communication and non-verbal communication, which includes any communication act except speech. In particular, full stop, comma, exclamation mark and question mark are the marks used within real-time subtitled communication contexts, and other signs are those used for the non-verbal communication. Specifically, for the non-verbal communication context, what I will explain will be a general overview, but it is important to bear in mind that the use of punctuation marks depends on the country of reference, meaning that in different countries we make a different use of the punctuation marks, while on the other hand, the punctuation marks pertaining to the verbal communication are generally shared in their use. A full stop marks the end of a complete sentence that is not a question or an exclamation. It looks like other marks, such as decimal points and abbreviation points in acronyms, but it does a different job. It ends a unit of sense and marks a similar but longer pause in the reading process than commas do. When typing, you can also use periods at the end of phrases that are not full sentences. For example, I like to break my writing up. You know. Obviously, in typing, subtitles and lines are to be broken at logical points. The ideal line break will be at a piece of punctuation like a full stop, more than a comma. If the break has to be elsewhere in the sentence, the velotypist avoids splitting the following parts of speech: article and noun, that is the plus table, a plus book, preposition and following phrase, that is on plus the table, in plus away, about plus his life. conjunction and following phrase or clause, that is and plus those books, but plus I went there. Pronoun and verb, that is he plus is, they plus will come, it plus comes. Parts of a complex verb, that is have plus eaten, will plus have plus been plus doing. Commas break sentences up into smaller parts that are easier to understand. They signify natural pauses, segregate pieces of information and separate items in a list, whether nouns or adjectives. Pausing for breath. You can use a comma to insert a natural break between two parts of a sentence, or to join two short sentences. For example, he ran down the street as fast as he could, comma, and tripped over his shoelaces. Here, the comma together with and joins the two sentences he ran down the street as fast as he could and he tripped over his shoelaces. Commas of this kind reflect the fact that you sometimes need to pause your train of thought to make sense of the words. Inserting additional information. Commas are also useful when you want to insert groups of words that add new information to a sentence, but which don't change its basic meaning. For example, Michael, comma, who was taller than James, comma, was the eldest of the children. Michael was the eldest of the children makes sense on its own, but commas allow you to add the fact that Michael was taller than James, without simply sticking it awkwardly on the end of the sentence. Separating items in a list. You can also use commas to separate items in lists. One fixed rule is that lists of 3 or more items need a comma between the first and second items. A comma is also needed between the second and third items if the list has 4 items and so on. The exclamation point is a mark of punctuation in verbal communication. To be effective, the exclamation point should be used in moderation. At the end of a sentence, the exclamation point is a mark of terminal punctuation. As such, it should not be followed by a period or question mark. Some will use both a question mark and exclamation point for an exclamatory question, but only the exclamation point is truly necessary. For example, what in the world are you doing up there? The question mark is used at the end of a direct question. Indirect questions take a period. For example, what is she doing tonight? Question mark. Or, I wonder what she's doing tonight, full stop. When a direct question occurs within a larger sentence, it takes a question mark. Note in the example, would they make it on time? Question mark, she wondered. The colon has grammatical uses, but also non-grammatical uses. Grammatically, it is used to introduce a list of items. For example, the bookstore specializes in 3 subjects, colon, art, architecture and graphic design. In real-time subtitling, and as for the non-grammatical uses, the colon is used in order to introduce a direct speech which cannot be turned into indirect speech. For example, she said, colon, what's your name? Question mark. Instead of she asked what her name was. Moreover, colon is used for quoting citations only in some countries, among which is Italy. Other countries use quotation marks instead. As for the non-verbal communication, again, it is important to remark that what I will explain will be a general overview. However, it is important to bear in mind that the use of punctuation marks depends on the country the real-time subtitler works for, meaning that in different countries she or he makes a different use of the punctuation marks, while on the other hand, the punctuation marks pertaining to the verbal communication are generally shared in their use. The non-verbal communication punctuation marks may include parentheses in Italy or brackets in the UK and the USA, quotation marks, ellipses in Italy or dashes in the UK, and other signs always according to the country in question, for example the angle brackets. We will now see these signs, the so-called paragrammatic signs, for non-verbal communication. The parentheses indicate additional information or concepts which are different from the spoken discourse. Important to say is that bracketed information should be an addition, not a substitution. For example, between brackets, Michael laughs, intends to pass the concept that besides the verbal speech, something is happening which cannot be typed directly by the real-time subtitler. Also, if a quotation includes a foreign word or phrase that might not be understood, parentheses provide a translation to better understand the meaning of the whole sentence. For example, I seldom spoke in French class. When I did, I usually just said je ne sais pas, between brackets, I don't know. Quotation marks clarify written language for both readers and writers by marking quotations, titles, translations, and other words and phrases. In typing, quotation marks perform the following basic functions. Enclose direct quotations. Direct quotations are quotations that are repeated verbatim. For example, President Franklin Roosevelt said, quote, "The United States of America have been suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan." End of quote. Titles of works. Use quotation marks with titles of works and parts of wholes. For example, the first chapter in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is, quote, "The Boy Who Lived." End of quote. Highlight novel uses of words and phrases. Use quotation marks and around words and phrases to indicate a special sense of use. For example, the motherboard is sometimes considered the, quote, brain of a computer. Again, there is an important note to make here. In Italy, quotation marks are not used to cite, rather velotypists use columns. In other countries, they are used instead with these different uses. An ellipsis is a set of 3 periods, indicating an omission. It is also used for omitted material within a quoted sentence. For example, John argues that by simplifying one's life, the laws of the universe will appear less complex. ... At the same time, dashes are used in the place of ellipses to mean that someone has been interrupted while speaking. Again, a specific difference for the Anglo-Saxon countries. After this interview, a real-time subtitler should bear in mind the concept that verbal communication and non-verbal communication are featured by several and different punctuation marks. The fundamentals in this distinction is that verbal marks of punctuation are almost shared in all countries, while they are country-specific in non-verbal communication and can change accordingly. The summary. In this learning outcome, we have introduced the main competence of the velotypist, the metalinguistic skill in the form of typing of punctuation as one important feature guaranteeing the functionality of a text in typing. In particular, we have dealt with 2 important aspects. A theoretical one, that is the text functionality, whose characteristics are accuracy, readability and legibility, and a more practical one, on the use of the most important punctuation characters used by the velotypist, both for verbal and non-verbal communication, in order to deliver an optimal target text to the reader. This too has to become a mechanic and optimized action when typing. To do so, Typing punctuation is the exercise to start with. In the homework session, we will see how to do this in practice. The exercises. The exercises for this video lecture are in the trainer's guide for this unit and in the PowerPoint presentation. All materials are available on our website www.ltaproject.eu. LTA Live Text Access, Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona, SDI, Internationale Hochschule, Scuola Superiore per Mediatori Linguistici, ZDF Digital, European Federation of Hard of Hearing People FHO, Velotype, SUBT Access, European Certification and Qualification Association ECQA. Co-funded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. Erasmus Plus project 2018-1-DE01-KA203-004218. The information and views set on this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official opinion of the European Union. Neither the European Union institutions and bodies, nor any person acting on their behalf, may be held responsible for the use which may be made of the information contained here.